Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest escalation in the issue of dodgy PPE contracts, as the government say they're going to sue the company linked to Tory peer Michelle Mone and her husband Douglas Barrowman for the full amount paid to them, £122 million, plus the amount spent on storing the useless PPE. Now, it's worth remembering that there is also a criminal investigation going on here as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So first of all, minor plug, I'll be doing something with the Sunday Roast channel tomorrow evening. I actually don't even know if it's live or not, but I'll link the channel in the description below if you're interested. But anyway, back to the dodgy PPE, and I find this latest development interesting. It's true that there had been some indications that the government were getting ready to take this action, but it seems strange for two reasons. First of all, the government have been happy to write off many billions of pounds of fraud, tens of billions of pounds, regarding dodgy PPE contracts, as well as furlough fraud, income tax fraud, and so on. When it comes to it, any fraud perpetrated potentially by wealthy people, presumably for fear of accidentally nicking a valuable Tory donor. In fact, the only fraud that the government actually pursue with any gusto is benefit fraud. No danger of bagging an important Tory with that, I suppose. Second, you would think this action runs the risk of shining a spotlight on the entire sordid affair. It's already a matter of established fact, thanks to a High Court judgment, that the government broke the law in the way they awarded these VIP lane contracts, with the Tories leaning heavily on the lie that they dealt with the pandemic competently. It seems curious that they would amplify the issue of their management of the early weeks of the crisis like this. Maybe they think there's a risk that the criminal investigation is going to result in prosecutions, and so they're cutting the cord on Michelle Mone early. The criminal charges may well concern the ownership of the companies involved here. I don't know what the specific criminal investigation is about, but the government paid £122 million for surgical gowns to a company called PPE Medpro. Now, just to review how dodgy this company is. First of all, it was only incorporated, in the UK at least, on May the 12th, 2020. Now, that was the time that the government were instigating their VIP lane to give priority to well-connected people for COVID-based contracts. Now, there were established and trusted manufacturers of PPE who'd been supplying us for years, as well as other countries' healthcare systems, and they weren't getting contracts for equipment from the NHS. I remember the news stories at the time, these manufacturers saying they were producing PPE for other countries. They would absolutely prioritise NHS orders. They weren't getting any. At a time when our supplies were low, frontline health and social care workers were doing without, putting them at great risk. The government were not giving contracts to established manufacturers who said, we can supply these things now. And why would they give a large contract to a newly incorporated company? And PPE Medpro wasn't the only such example of a company springing up out of the ground at exactly the same time being awarded these contracts. Now, the potential for criminal charges will possibly be centred around the persons of significant control. Essentially, only one person is listed, Mr. Anthony Page, on the basis that he owns 75% or more of the shares. But here's where it gets interesting. PPE Medpro were given two contracts. One was for £122 million for the surgical gowns that the government say were useless and the NHS never used. Another was for about £81 million for surgical masks, which appear to have been used. Mind you, it was a hell of a price to pay for surgical masks. It worked out at fewer than 3 masks for £1. Now, for surgical masks, which are actually fairly cheap, they're the lower end of useful masks, that is a high price to pay for such an order. It's more than I paid for mine at the same time, in much smaller numbers. But this also highlights the fact that even when the contracts were fulfilled with the right equipment, we still paid well over the odds, and that was a way of rewarding Tory donors and friends. It was a cash grab. It's just that some of them took the piss by not just overcharging for the equipment, but actually not even providing the equipment ordered, so it couldn't be used. As a result of which deaths occurred. But anyway, the point is that the company was given about £203 million altogether for the 2 contracts. Now, according to documents seen by The Guardian, Douglas Barrowman, who is Mone's husband, who is based offshore naturally, they're based in the Isle of Man, was paid at least £65 million from PPE Medpro specifically for the profits on these 2 contracts. Now, consider that £65 million from these 2 contracts, totaling £203 million. That's a 32% profit right there. And if you assume that Barrowman took all of the profits from the contracts, that is still a hell of a profit on a government contract and shows you the scale of the generosity of the contracts that the government were giving of our money to companies recommended by influential Tories such as Michelle Mone. But going back to that person of interest, Anthony Page. So if he's the only one considered to have significant control of the company, how come Barrowman was paid 32% of the value of the contracts in profit? Because he can only, according to Companies House details, have up to 25% of the shares. If Page holds at least 75% of those shares, and even if we say Barrowman, as I say, holds the rest of it, this doesn't add up. The total profit made would be greater than the total value of the contracts if the profits were divided according to the number of shares. This would suggest that Barrowman must be someone with significant control over PPE Medpro if he is receiving such a huge proportion of the money awarded. But he's not listed as such on Companies House. Now that would suggest a criminal offence has been committed because by law all people with significant control of a company must be personally registered as such. It's basically a way of stopping the use of empty offices in offshore tax havens covering up conflicts of interest. You know the thing used to happen, and you know you have your company based in some place that's miles away from the jurisdiction of the tax authorities, and it's just an empty office. There's basically no one there apart from someone to pick up the mail now and then, and you're disguising who really controls these companies. You know, it's a criminal offence to hide your control of companies. And the leaked documents from HSBC, which as I say were seen by The Guardian, suggest that of that at least £65 million that Barrowman received for these 2 PPE contracts, £29 million of it was paid to a trust whose beneficiaries are Michelle Mone and her children. Mone also denies links with this company. Now, if The Guardian have been able to see documents which show this money trail, and the fact that Mone is not suing the arse out of them means that they have seen them, they're quite sure they've seen them, then it's quite likely that the National Crime Agency, who are known to be investigating Barrowman and Mone, will have these documents as well. In fact, given that they carried out raids on properties linked to PPE Medpro, but Barrowman and Mone's mansion as well earlier this year, you have to wonder why it's taking so long to bring charges. And you're thinking, well, maybe there's a lot of dodgy dealings going far beyond these PPE contracts. You know, in defence, PPE Medpro are trying to claim that the surgical gowns they provided were fine, passed inspection, but that the government over-ordered PPE due to incompetence, and we're now trying to recover money against whichever contracts they thought were the most vulnerable. Now, I'm not sure if it's credible to suggest that the Tory government are desperate to recover £122 million corruptly when they are making zero effort to stop literally tens of billions of pounds worth of tax fraud punching a hole in our country's finances. But this is a government who spent £37 billion on a track and trace system that didn't even work, didn't even do anything of any good, when other countries managed a fully functioning version for like a few tens of millions of pounds, like £50 million. If PPE Medpro want to try and paint such a government as being tight with money, good luck with that. But like I say, I still find it curious that the government are chasing this when they've waved goodbye to way larger sums of money, which could easily be recovered. It risks having Mone or Barrowman spill the beans on things we may not even know about if they feel backed into a corner. It risks highlighting the financial links between the two Tories and the company, which they deny involvement in. It risks keeping the issue of dodgy PPE in the news as the COVID inquiry rumbles on. It might even still be topical enough when Labour come to power to shine a spotlight on the entire affair. I've said before, if I were the Labour leadership, one of the first things I would do in government is order a full arm's-length public inquiry into the way the government dealt with PPE, wide-ranging, covering the whole lot. And they can easily justify it politically because, well, we could easily have another pandemic. Indeed, we're getting ready for one. We need to make sure we learn lessons. Just get everything out in the open, in public, with an independent public inquiry. So all I can think is that the government feel it will be more damaging later on to be seen to have ignored this particular fraud than it is to do their part in keeping the news relevant with their own legal action against their former friends. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.